I've wrestled with whether to share this story for a long time. It's been nearly 3 years since everything happened, but the wounds still feel fresh sometimes, no matter how much distance I put between myself and the past. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the isolation, the sheer heartbreak, has sat heavy on my chest for so long that I think writing it down might finally let me breathe a little easier. Let me take you back to 2019. At the time, I was 30 years old and, by all accounts, living the life I had always dreamed of. I was married to Sarah, also 30, and we had built a life that seemed, at least on the surface, nearly perfect. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of this story, though that's not her real name. For 6 years, she had been my best friend, my partner, my everything. We shared everything: trips to new cities, lazy nights on the couch, quiet dinners where we talk about nothing and everything all at once. I loved her deeply, and I truly believe she loved me the same way. But, as I would later realize, there were cracks in the foundation of our marriage, small fissures I had either ignored or excused because I didn't want to face what they might mean. The first real sign came early in 2019. I had to travel for a work conference. The first time I'd ever spent a night away from her in all the years we'd been together. I was nervous to leave, not because I didn't trust her, but because it felt strange to be apart. So, when Sarah suggested that her friend Mark, someone she had been close to for years, come over to keep her company, I was caught off guard. Mark wasn't just any friend. He was someone Sarah had been intimate with before we met, a piece of her past I had tried my best to accept. I knew they were still in touch, texting here and there, but the idea of him staying over while I was gone felt like a slap in the face. He hadn't set foot in our home once in 6 years, and now, suddenly, his presence was necessary because I wouldn't be there. I told her no, firmly but calmly, explaining that it made me uncomfortable. She was furious. Her anger burned hot and fast, but she ultimately dropped the idea. At least, as far as I knew. Looking back, that moment was like a thread pulling loose from the fabric of our marriage. I didn't know it then, but everything would slowly start unraveling. By late 2019, things between us had changed. At first, it was subtle, the kind of shifts you might dismiss as everyday fluctuations in a long-term relationship. She stopped sitting next to me on the couch, choosing instead to perch on the far end. Her body turned away from mine. She started changing in a different room, a habit I found strange but didn't question at the time. And then there was her Apple Watch. One night, while we were at a movie theater, I noticed her glancing at the tiny screen on her wrist, typing furiously while the film played. That wasn't like her. Sarah loved movies, and she had always been the kind of person to lose herself in a story. Curious, I leaned over slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of the messages. They weren't anything overtly romantic, but they felt off. Too intimate, too warm for what she claimed was a new coworker. After the movie, I asked her about it. She laughed it off, saying it was just work talk, and I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she avoided my eyes when she said it planted a seed of doubt in my mind, one that would soon grow roots I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. I would reach for her hand, and she'd pull away without thinking. I tried to talk to her about her day, but her answers were clipped, as if she didn't want me to know too much. At night, lying in bed beside her, I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage. The moment I finally decided to look for answers came in January 2020. I had spent weeks battling my own guilt, telling myself that checking her devices was a betrayal in itself. But the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It kept whispering that something was wrong, and if I didn't figure out what, I might go insane. Her phone was always with her, and I didn't know the passcode. But her watch? That was different. She often left it on the nightstand, and when I picked it up, I realized the code was our anniversary. I don't know what I expected to find when I entered it, but I wasn't prepared for the tidal wave of pain that hit me as I scrolled through her messages. There they were, conversations between Sarah and Mark, laughing at my obliviousness, mocking me for not noticing the truth. There were also messages between Sarah and a coworker, Carl, filled with explicit details of their affair. She wrote to him with a passion and affection I hadn't seen from her in years. My stomach churned as I read about how she had lied to me, about trips she claimed were for consoling a friend but were really to meet Carl. She even mentioned how she started changing in the bathroom, so I wouldn't see the hickeys on her body. What cut the deepest, though, were the messages where she talked about me. She described me as pathetic, said the thought of me touching her made her skin crawl. And the part that gutted me most of all? She had told her therapist everything about the affairs, about her disgust for me, and the therapist had advised her to tell me the truth. But instead, she chose to keep lying. I stayed up all night, unable to stop reading. Each message felt like a knife to the heart, but I couldn't look away. I took pictures of everything, my hands shaking as I captured the evidence. By the time the sun rose, I felt like a hollow shell of myself. When Sarah came home that evening, I confronted her. I didn't tell her I had gone through her messages. I said I had noticed the hickeys, that I knew she had been texting someone. At first, she denied everything. Then she tried to twist the truth, claiming the hickeys were from something innocent. But when I pushed harder, revealing bits and pieces of what I knew, she finally snapped. I thought she might cry, that she'd beg for forgiveness or show some sign of remorse. Instead, she exploded in anger, accusing me of invading her privacy. She turned everything around on me, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She stormed out of the house that night and disappeared for 3 days, leaving me alone to pick up the shattered pieces of our marriage. When she returned, she claimed she wanted to fix things, but by then it was too late. The damage was done. When Sarah returned after those 3 days, the air around her felt different. She wasn't the woman I'd once called my best friend and partner. Her face carried a strange sort of confidence, the kind you wear when you've rehearsed your lines but aren't sure they'll land. "I want to fix this," she said, her voice almost too steady, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. Despite everything, there was a small, desperate part of me that clung to the hope that she could explain it all away, that there was some grand misunderstanding that could pull us back to what we once were. But as I stood there, staring into the eyes of the woman who had mocked me behind my back and betrayed everything we'd built, I felt the cold reality settle over me. There was no going back. Still, I agreed to give her the time she asked for. She suggested couples counseling, and though I knew it was futile, I went along with it. Maybe part of me thought it would force her to face the truth. Or maybe I just needed to hear her admit it out loud. Our first session was a disaster. I sat there, raw and vulnerable, explaining why we were there, that my wife had cheated on me, that she had lied to my face over and over again. But instead of taking responsibility, Sarah picked apart my words like a prosecutor in a courtroom. "Affair is such a strong word," she said, her tone sharp and defensive. It wasn't like that. I could feel the therapist's eyes darting between us, their polite neutrality slipping for just a moment as they registered Sarah's audacity. But she wasn't done. She started listing every minor disagreement we'd ever had, twisting them into justifications for her actions. "You never stood up to your parents when they gave me that awful Christmas gift," she said. "And remember when your mom teased me about my cooking? You didn't even defend me." It was surreal, listening to her try to reframe years of my love and commitment as coldness and neglect. Every word felt like a slap in the face, as if she were trying to gaslight me into believing that her infidelity was somehow my fault. The therapist tried to steer the conversation back to constructive ground, but by then, I was done. I realized in that moment that Sarah wasn't interested in fixing our marriage. She was interested in saving face. Her plan had never been to work through our problems together. It had been to quietly end things on her terms, leaving me blindsided and broken. She even admitted, in a moment of frustration, that her original goal was to find an apartment and serve me divorce papers without warning. Hearing that felt like the final nail in the coffin. Whatever hope I'd clung to was gone. I told her it was over, that I had already spoken to a lawyer. For the first time, I saw a real fear flash across her face. But even then, she didn't plead or apologize. She simply shifted gears, trying to regain control of the situation. We agreed that she would move out, and I even helped her find an apartment. At that point, I would have done anything to get her out of the house faster. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. In March 2020, just as Sarah was preparing to leave, the world came to a grinding halt. COVID-19 swept across the globe, and with it came lockdowns, closures, and uncertainty. The renovations on her apartment were delayed indefinitely, leaving her with nowhere to go. And so, we found ourselves trapped in the house together, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. Those 3 months were hell. Imagine spending every waking moment with the person who had shattered your heart into a million pieces, knowing there was no escape. I tried to keep my distance, locking myself in my office for hours at a time, or throwing myself into yard work just to avoid her. But no matter how hard I tried, there was no escaping the reality of our situation. Every meal we cooked felt like a silent battle, every passing glance a reminder of everything we'd lost. At night, I would lie awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how it had all come to this. I thought about the life we were supposed to have, the dreams we'd shared, and the love I thought we'd built together. And then I thought about the messages I'd read, the cruel jokes, the explicit texts, the lies, and felt the anger rise in my chest like a tidal wave. Sarah, for her part, acted as though nothing had happened. She went about her days as if we were still a happily married couple, chatting with friends on the phone and laughing at TV shows in the living room. It was maddening, watching her pretend that everything was fine when my entire world had been turned upside down. When June finally arrived and the lockdowns began to lift, Sarah moved out for good. I helped her pack her things, each box a painful reminder of the life we had shared. She left without a word to her family about the divorce, insisting that they didn't need to know the details. I respected her decision, though part of me wanted to tell them everything. By July, the house was mine again. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I started to rebuild my life piece by piece, leaning on friends and finding solace in the little things. Morning runs, quiet evenings with a book, and eventually someone new. Sarah and Carl didn't last. I wasn't surprised. Their relationship had been built on lies, and when the dust settled, they had nothing real to hold on to. As for me, I found someone who truly values me, someone who knows the meaning of love and commitment. I don't think about Sarah much anymore. She's just a chapter in my story, one that I've closed and left behind. But writing this down, reliving it all, feels like a final goodbye to the man I used to be, the man who trusted too easily and ignored the warning signs. Thanks for listening. If nothing else, I hope my story reminds you to trust your instincts and value yourself enough to walk away when someone shows you who they really are.